We're going to stick with Westminster because earlier this week, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, was found to have persistently bullied members of staff, leading to him being permanently banned from holding a parliamentary pass. Now, unfortunately, there have been many similar stories over the past few years where those in positions of power have been accused of mistreating staff rep members, raising questions about a culture of bullying and intimidation within our institutions. Parliament, government departments and party HQs have all seen their fair share of these scandals over the years, and efforts have been made to address it. So why do we keep hearing of these things going on, and what should be done to stamp it out for good? Arlene, what do you make of this kind of overall, but particularly the Bercow case, because the Speaker is so influential? What do you think that verdict means, and do you think it'll lead to a better system being implemented for complaints?
Well, what really struck me was the amount of people who really deified, if I can use that word, John Bercow when he was there for their own political purposes, even though they knew, and they must have known, Deanna, what was going on. Very few of them have retracted their deification of him, I have to say. They've all gone particularly quiet, including some people here from Northern Ireland who thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it was all because, of course, he was trying to prevent Brexit from happening. And I think that that's so incredibly wrong, that you can just ignore what is very clearly happening for your own political purposes. So the first thing that has to happen is that people, regardless of whether they like the person or like the cause that he's promoting, have to speak out when they see wrong happening. And it has to be done by people who, as I say, may think that John Bercow was a great man, but if he was doing what he was doing, and he clearly was, then they should have been speaking out at that time.
Mm-hmm. Paul, one of the things that I'm quite interested in, Ray, the Bercow case, is that it took him being found guilty to be suspended from the Labour Party. Do you think that should have happened sooner, given the severity of the allegations, or do you think the timing was right?
I think there's an argument to say it should have been, simply because the allegations were, as you say, so serious. I believe in due process. I believe in the principle of innocent until proven guilty. But I think suspension is right in cases where the allegations are so serious. And in this case, having read the report, I have to say some of the stuff was pretty horrendous. And as a trade union official, I've represented victims of bullying in the workplace, and in my view, everybody should be entitled to dignity and respect when they go to work. Nobody should have to go to work with that fear in their stomach that they might be bullied by a senior manager. And I think also the more authority you have as a manager, the more humble you should be. That's the approach that you should take to it. I guess in terms of the wider context of the Bercow issue, my slight concern would be that I wouldn't want it to slide into us suddenly treating MPs with kid gloves and saying that MPs are now off limits when it comes to robust criticism, because the reality is I think MPs are in a different position to ordinary members of staff within Parliament. MPs make life and death decisions. The chamber has to be characterised by robust debate and criticism. So in terms of ordinary staff, absolutely we need to stamp that out and punish people who are guilty of bullying, but we also need to safeguard the principle of robust debate in Parliament itself.
How much of this do we think is with regards to staff, perhaps more junior staff, being afraid to speak out at all? Because there are a lot of young people working in and around politics who are very ambitious. They potentially want to go into politics themselves kind of more fully one day as an elected member or otherwise. And I think there's a concern from some that if they speak out, then they might be seen as a bit of a troublemaker, and that might kind of harm their kind of ongoing career prospects. Arlene, I can see you nodding. Do you think that's an issue? And if so, how do we address it?
Well, I think it is an issue. It's a similar issue to women speaking out when I was coming through the ranks way back 20, 30 years ago, Deanna, that if you were a strident woman, you were seen to be somewhat of a troublemaker. And so if you raised concerns, maybe you should be sidelined. And I think for younger staff, there has to be the appropriate processes in place so that they can raise alarms in the appropriate way if they feel that they are being bullied or intimidated or spoken to in an inappropriate way. There has to be a proper process in place so those young people can come forward. I absolutely agree with you because, yes, those young people are ambitious. They want a career in politics. And in order to get that, they shouldn't have to stay silent if they're being treated inappropriately.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important just to point out that kind of in Parliament there are now confidential helplines and HR advice available for staff where they can raise these concerns and get some advice. I think it's important that we put that on record. But one of the things that I think we also need to be kind of cautious of is where do we draw the line between a manager or a boss being kind of robust and then that crossing into bullying? I think bosses can be demanding, but where do we draw that line? Paul, I see you nodding there. What's your take?
Yeah, there's a balance to be struck. You know, I think managers, particularly in a high pressure environment, which, you know, Parliament often is, have the right to be firm, have the right to be demanding, have the right to expect certain standards. I think it's when it slides into abuse and slides into harassment that it becomes completely unacceptable. And I think, Deanna, that most reasonably minded people, when they look at a given situation, would know the difference between a boss being firm and demanding and a boss being abusive and harassing somebody. And any boss who's got, you know, their wits about them would know, I think, where that line is drawn. And what I would say in terms of, you know, going back to the previous point about young people, I think you're absolutely right. But I'll make a plug for trade unions here, because when it comes to challenging inappropriate behaviour and bullying in the workplace, trade unions over the years have been at the forefront of that drive and have developed really strong and sound policies around doing that. And I know that from experience as a trade union official myself. So, you know, my recommendation to any young person going into a workplace, particularly a high pressure workplace, would be join a union, be active in your union, because, you know, if at some point you do need support and help and advice, they'll be there for you.
A good plug for unions then. I mean, I would agree in terms of supporting kind of individuals through these cases. I think unions do play a really vital role.